Welcome to the Ifakara Spotlight Series, a platform for scientists to share groundbreaking insights in public health. I am Jane Moshi from the Communications Office at the Ifakara Health Institute. Malaria is an infectious disease spread to humans by a type of mosquito called Anopheles. It is most common in tropical countries. Malaria is preventable and curable. However, its elimination has been difficult, especially in African countries where malaria is still one of the leading causes of deaths, killing hundreds of thousands of people each year, mostly young children. Today we are honored to have Dr. Marceline Finda, a research scientist at the Ifakara Health Institute, who is going to discuss with us her latest results on new technology for malaria elimination. Malaria is known to be one of the leading killers in Africa and in Tanzania. Could you please tell us, what do the statistics say?
Currently, on average, the country has a prevalence of about 8%, but that varies. So there are regions that have a prevalence of more than 20%, and then there are regions that have a prevalence of less than 1%. So normally those are areas that are approaching elimination. And then also it varies between rural and urban settings. So it's more prevalent in rural settings where it can go, on average, the rural settings have a prevalence of 10%, and then in urban settings, the prevalence is very low, so at less than 1% on average. So it really varies in the country. There are areas that are more affected than others. Poor communities are way more affected than the better off communities.
Okay, so as we know, there are a lot of tools that are being used in malaria control and elimination in Africa and in Tanzania. Why gene drives? What are gene drives?
So why gene drives? It is true that there are many strategies that are used to combat these diseases. As a country, we're focusing mostly on using bed nets that are treated with long-lasting insecticides. We call those LLINs. And the country is making really great efforts to make sure that all households and all communities, especially the endemic communities, have a wide coverage of these bed nets. But there are many challenges. Also, we have bed nets. We also have highly subsidized malaria testing and treatment services. So you never hear from anyone that they cannot afford testing for malaria or treatment. So the government has highly subsidized that, and also there are other strategies, of course, educating people. There are so many campaigns to inform people on how they can best protect themselves from malaria. The challenge with all these interventions is that mosquitoes, sometimes we focus so much on the human side and we forget the mosquito itself, because that's also an organism that wants to live. So they find ways of going around all the interventions that we put in place. For example, when we're using insecticides in bed nets, mosquitoes build resistance against those insecticides. So, and that has been documented over the past few years that it's increasing. So mosquitoes are not really being killed by the insecticide input. If people are protected inside their houses, mosquitoes find a way of targeting people outside their houses, or they come earlier in the day. And then another big challenge is also that people just get tired of using these interventions. For example, people get tired of using bed nets day in, day out. So all of these challenges led to looking for other alternative strategies or novel strategies that can overcome the challenges we are facing with the current interventions, and that's sort of where gene drives have evolved into. And it is, so gene drives is a mosquito modification technology, or genetic modification of mosquitoes, and you're modifying them to be what you want them to be. So you, like for example, there are two approaches. One, you can either modify mosquitoes so that they are unable to transmit malaria. So mosquitoes will still be there, but they can no longer transmit the disease. Or you modify mosquitoes so that you eliminate them altogether. So these are two. One is called population replacement, where you're replacing malaria transmitting mosquitoes with mosquitoes that cannot really transmit malaria anymore. And another is called population suppression, which is another gene drives approach that modifies mosquitoes so that the population of that vector, that species that you want to modify, is significantly reduced or eliminated altogether. And this way, what gene drives does is it uses mosquitoes to target mosquitoes, instead of what we're currently doing with our current interventions, where we're using our own strategies and then we're hoping that mosquitoes will react to it. What gene drives does is you modify mosquitoes and then you release them, and then those modified mosquitoes look for other mosquitoes and modify them into what you want, which is either reducing their capacity as vectors or reducing their populations altogether.
Okay, well, thank you for that explanation. So now in your study, you explored the perspectives of different African nations on the use of gene drives to combat malaria in the region. Now, please, can you explain to us why is this important and what did you find out?
My colleagues and I, we're very passionate about obviously really eliminating this from our homes, from our continent. And when the development of gene drives came, obviously the recent findings were optimistic that this could really be the technology that could very well lead us into eliminating this disease. But at the onset, it was clear that it wasn't the technology that we understood very well. The initial work that we did back in 2018, we realized that even our scientists, the majority of them, did not really understand this technology very well. We were aware of it, it was gaining interest worldwide, but when we did an in-depth exploration of whether people actually understood how it works, how it might respond to our own malaria control challenges, it was clear to us that that knowledge was not yet popular among our key stakeholders and key decision makers. So we started to talk about it. We had a project that we called African Conversations about gene drives. And what we did mostly was to sit with all the key decision makers in different countries across Africa to talk to them about this technology, introduce it to them, and then gather their initial reaction to it, their insights or their recommendations. So we started our work in 25 countries, representing all of malaria endemic Africa from east to west, central and south. In different malaria transmission levels, from countries that are highly endemic to countries that are approaching elimination, to get their reaction about this technology and how it might respond to their malaria control and elimination needs. So we saw this as a way to introduce this technology to African stakeholders or African decision makers to make sure that we start talking about it, we start raising awareness about it, and then we also start putting in our recommendations on how it really should be, on how it should be developed, on how it should be researched, and when the deployment eventually comes, how should it be deployed to make sure that it is safe for us and it responds to our malaria control challenges.
Okay, so now from the findings that you gathered, what do the findings mean for gene drive research in Africa and in Tanzania?
Okay. What the findings mean? All right, so maybe I'll just spend a couple of minutes to talk about the findings that we actually got and then what they mean. So we set to explore people's insights, first of all, on what was their understanding of the malaria situations in their countries and the challenges that different countries are facing, and then their insights on how gene drives could come in and help improve the malaria control and elimination efforts in the communities. So, just focusing on the gene drives, first of all, I remember when we started this work, we were nervous that there is always controversy about genetic modifications, and we weren't sure if this technology could be received, understanding that it's also a genetic modification approach. So our first finding was that there wasn't any opposition towards it among most of the stakeholders that we spoke with. And we spoke with hundreds of stakeholders over the past, it's now been 5 years we've been doing this work in different phases. But there were a lot of concerns that needed answers, a lot of questions on, for example, the effectiveness of the technology, how effective it would be, how safe it would be. Would it be safe for the environment? Would it be safe for people? Would it be safe for the ecosystem? So there were these concerns that needed answers. There were concerns on its applicability to the different countries, for example. Genetic modifications, and in this case gene drives, only target one species at a time. And sometimes the species that is being researched is not a dominant species in a country. So different countries have different malaria situations, and there was a concern on how this technology now could respond to malaria challenges in a country where the species that is modified is not necessarily a dominant species in the country. So that would it be applicable to a country like that? And also, obviously, there was a major concern was that this technology was still quite new to Africa. There are no experts who actually have in-depth understanding of how this technology works. What happens if something goes wrong? Do we have people who can actually identify that something has gone wrong? And do we have people who can mitigate any potential risks that may come out of this? So the lack of expertise within the countries, and then the need for evidence, these were the highlights of the work that we did, the findings. And then also I think the major highlight for me was that there wasn't opposition. No one said, no, I don't want it. The stakeholders just said, this is potential, this looks great, but we need evidence for its effectiveness and safety, and we need experts in the countries before we say yes to it. So these were the concerns. And now what does that mean for Africa or for Tanzania? I think for me it's great findings, especially for gene drives developers or funders, to know that we are interested as well in this technology. And how we're interested now, if we take our time to talk about it, to raise our concerns and our recommendations on how this technology should come to us. This will ensure that even while it's still being researched and developed and improved, our concerns are taken into account to make sure that this technology is actually now developed for our situation in mind, or specific to our context. So the findings definitely mean that, one, that there isn't opposition as we thought, and then two, we do understand what our context is, and then we also do require that for this technology to actually come and be useful to our country or our continent. We need to ensure that the safety features are in place, that it's effective, or at least its effectiveness can be demonstrated, and then to also make sure that we have experts in-house to really understand and manage and evaluate.
Okay, well, thank you for that elaboration on what the findings actually mean. Now, I think you've already kind of dived into the next question that I had, where I wanted to just find out from you your opinion on what more needs to be done in gene drive research so that it's adapted as a tool to combat malaria. Do you have any further comments on that? Because you've already touched on that a little bit, but you can just maybe summarize your thoughts.
Other countries, a lot of other countries in Africa, is that we don't have regulations for this technology. So one of the major concerns, especially we also spoke with experts, was that this technology could be ready for deployment right now, but our systems and our countries are not ready for it. I don't think there is any country at the moment that has, or maybe South Africa, has regulations to govern the public health side of genetically modified organisms, especially a technology that is a bit more trickier, like as gene drives, because with gene drives, even if you release these mosquitoes as an experiment, they could potentially spread beyond where you want to confine them. So they are not sort of like using GM crops where maybe you can say I'm only planting these in this region and not anywhere else. With mosquitoes, soon as you release them, they could go wherever they go. They can fly, they can be transported, they can cross borders to other countries. So this is sort of a risky part about this technology, and we're not yet prepared for that. So I think what countries need to really focus on right now is to make sure that they start looking into what regulations make sense in terms of public health, in terms of the environment. I think we do have regulations that for protecting the environment side, but in terms of public health, not yet. So it's important for the countries and our regulators, of course, and we've spoken with them about this, to start putting in place these regulations for governing the gene drive, maybe collaborating with other African countries, for example, because mosquitoes don't really respect the country borders that we have. So if Tanzania says yes, and maybe Malawi says, well, we are waiting for now, we are not yet ready, mosquitoes, the modified mosquitoes can still cross. So we do need to start to discuss these issues with our neighbors and then have regulations that are friendly to all or that are acceptable to all. So, of course, that I think is really important. And then also to start building our interest in this, to train our students to understand these issues. I think the technology is still relatively early on, it's not yet ready. It has these mosquitoes. I think I should make it very clear that the gene drive modified mosquitoes have not been released anywhere in Africa. They are still undergoing lab research and evaluation. But that will come. There will come time when they are ready for release. And we need to be ready to start talking about them. I think at the moment, there isn't much we can talk to the public about because they are not yet ready. They are still being evaluated. But when they are ready, we also need to be ready to discuss them. So starting to prepare ground for that, maybe start to communicate about the science of genes to the students, to people in general, so that when it's time to actually talk to the public about this, it's not so much of a very, very new thing, so that people at least have some background to it. So I think there is a lot. I can take a whole day to talk about what we need to do, but I think these are just.
Well, thank you so much for sharing those highlights. I think those are quite insightful comments. And this part of the session was meant for questions and answers. However, going through our different platforms, we have not received any questions at the moment. But for our listeners, our viewers, wherever you are, this video will be up, available for view on YouTube. So if you have any questions after this has been uploaded as a recording, feel free to share them. And Dr. Lina, as well as the communications team here at Ifakara, will be more than willing to respond to those. So I would just like to extend a heartfelt thank you to Dr. Lina for availing yourself. Thank you so much for being a part of this platform and sharing your expertise on this groundbreaking research that you and your team are doing. And also, I would like to extend gratitude to all of our viewers on the different platforms for tuning in. And basically, to stay tuned for more illuminating discussions on Ifakara's Spotlight series. My name is Jane Moshi. Asanteni sana.